Thank you for joining me for month 4 of Cheshire Quilters Guild 2019 Block of the Month. This month we're doing block 4, which is Optical Illusions, and I'm going to start by taking my Fabric E squares and I'm going to draw lines on the back. Just want to get a pencil that I think will show up. I'm just going to draw diagonal lines because I'm going to be making quarter square triangles out of these. Let's see if this happens to be a yellow pencil. Now, I don't know if you can see the line on that or not, but I can see it well enough to do what I need to do. So let me draw the line on the other. And I'm just going point to point with my ruler. Okay, so we're going to take these Fabric E squares and we're going to layer one of them with a Fabric A square. And the other one I'm layering with a Fabric D square. And now I'm going to take these over to my sewing machine and I'm going to sew a 1/4 inch on either side of the drawn lines. So I'm going to go do that and I'll meet you back here. Okay, so I've got my 2 lines sewn on both of these, and so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to cut these apart along the drawn line, so just point to point. Some people like to use scissors, but since it's a nice straight line, I like to go ahead and use my rotary cutter because I can do it faster and more accurately. Okay, so now I'm going to take these over to my pressing surface and I'm going to press all the seams open. So I'll meet you back here when I get my pressing done. Oh, crap. Okay, so I've gotten my things pressed, and then I've already done the next step, which is I took my ruler, I placed it so the line was on the seam, and I drew essentially from corner to corner, though it may not be exactly corner to corner, across the back of my AE half square triangles. And I say it may not be exactly because we might not have sewn exactly straight or whatever the case might be, but we're still going to draw, make sure we have one line on the seam so that we're drawing exactly perpendicular. Now we're going to take these squares and we're going to layer them with our AD half square triangles. We're going to do that by lining up the 2 seams, and so our Fabric E is on each side. So Fabric A is going to go against E and Fabric E is going to go against D. So we're going to line those up, get those seams as square as you can, and now I'm going to take it to my machine and I'm going to sew on either side of that seam. So again, here's my Fabric D and E. I'm going to put D against E against D, A against E. Line up those seams as best you can. And then we're going to sew across. And you might want to just, to make sure that the seams are lined up well, you might want to put a pin in the middle just to make sure that you get the E fabrics to just touch. We don't want to have an overlap there. We want them to just touch. Okay, let me go sew those and I'll meet you back here. Okay, I've got my things sewn, so now I can just cut apart along the drawn lines. And each one of these will make a 1/4 square triangle that has 2 Fabric E, 1 Fabric D, and 1 Fabric A triangle in it. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to take these over to the pressing surface and I'm going to press these seams open so that we have a nice flat intersection in the back of our 1/4 square triangle. I'll be right back. Okay, look at those nice beautiful 1/4 square triangles I've got. Now I want to square up each one of these to be 4.5 inches, and I can kind of cheat by using my 4.5 by 8.5 ruler, because it's got 45s that come out from each of the corners. So if I just lay that on the seams, I can very easily trim the outside edges, and there shouldn't be much to trim, just enough to get those dog ears off, and maybe a little bit extra. If you don't have any extra, you probably sewed fatter than a 1/4 inch seam when you sewed the pieces together. So let me show you one more time. I'm gonna just trim these two sides, and then I rotate around and trim the other two sides. I could actually, because my ruler is only 4.5 inches wide, I could actually trim 3 sides and then just come back and trim the 4th side, but 2 at a time is enough. Okay, so I'm going to finish trimming up my 1/4 square triangles, and I'll meet you back here in very soon. Okay, next we want the 3 by 6 inch fabric E and fabric D rectangles, not the shorter ones. There's ones that are only 5 3/8. We don't want the 5 3/8 rectangles. We want to be sure that we've got the longer 6 inch rectangles. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to draw a line down the middle to split this into 2 3-inch squares. And then I'm going to draw diagonal lines from the upper corners down to the middle, and you should be able to put a 45-degree line on the bottom of the rectangle and line up those 2 points, the upper corner with the middle of the bottom. And I can do that on both halves of my rectangle. So I'm going from this corner down to the bottom. Well, what was the bottom? I've rotated it now. So what I end up with is I've got a V and a line down the middle. So this I'm going to layer with my fabric D rectangle, and now I'm going to stitch 1/4 inch seams on either side of the diagonal lines, not the center middle one, just the 2 diagonal lines. I'll meet you back here when I have that sewing done. Okay, so I've stitched on either side of the diagonals, here and here, and now I've got 3 drawn lines. I've got the vertical line I drew at 3 inches. I'm going to cut there, and then I'm going to cut along each of the diagonals, which essentially is going to be corner to corner, on my resulting pieces. And what we're going to create by doing that, what we're going to create by doing that are 4 half square triangles. So now I'm going to take these over to the pressing mat. I'm going to press these seams open also. Now it may seem like a pain to be pressing all these seams open. Why couldn't we press the side and nest and then spin or furl the seams when we put pieces together? That would work good, except we're going to be putting lots of these intersections together, so it's better if we press them open, so ultimately the most seams will have the least bulk that we can manage. So I'll be back when I get these pressed. Okay, here's my little half square triangles. Now the same way that we squared up the 1/4 square triangles, we're going to square these up. I'm going to square these to 2.5 inches, and we should have some extra to trim on off all the sides. I'm putting the 45 line of my ruler right on the seam, and that's giving me a nice crisp trim on our triangles. So I'm going to finish up trimming these, and I'll meet you back here. Okay, now that we have our half square triangles all trimmed up, we're going to put them together in pairs because we're going to make a nice little pinwheel. So you want to orient them in this direction so that our pinwheel, our fabric E pinwheel, is spinning this way around. Fabric D pinwheel is circling clockwise. Fabric E is going counterclockwise. And you just need to sew these together in pairs, press the seam open, and then sew the two pairs together, pressing this seam open. What we end up with should be a 4.5 inch pinwheel. So let's go see if I can do that. Okay, I've got my half square triangles sewn into pairs with my seams pressed open, and now I want to sew these together. And it's really important for our pinwheel to look perfect, for these seams to be lined up exactly. So I want to show you how I pin open seams to get the seams to line up. So what I'm going to do, I'm putting the pin right through the point made on the pressed open seam. So when it comes through, it should be right at the point on the front in the seams. Let's see if I can get this to work. Right there, right there. Now I'm going to take this pin and I'm going to stick it through from the front at this point on the other piece. So when I do that and I put the pieces together, I can kind of peek and see, yep, my seams are lined up. Now I squiggle, and that's a technical word, squiggle. I'm going to squiggle the pieces around till it's nice and lined up, and I'm going to peek in there again, make sure they're nice and straight. And without moving this pin, which is going straight through, I'm going to take a second pin and I'm going to put it in the seam on the side that's going to lead into the needle when I put it on the machine. Okay, make sure this pin is still going straight through. I can pull that one out. Now I'm going to take it to my machine and I'm going to stitch, and not until my needle hits into the seam allowance am I going to pull this pin out. I don't want to run over it, but I'm going to pull this out after the needle has caught into that seam allowance, and then I'll finish sewing the seam. That should make sure that my seams are all nice and lined up. So let's go see if I can do that. Okay, I hope you can see right there where I've stitched across and I went right through that seam intersection. If I look on the back, it's pretty good. And let's open it up. And what I've got is a pretty decent seam intersection for those 4 pinwheels. So I'm going to go ahead and press this open, and I'll have my 4.5 inch pinwheel finished. So I'll set that aside and then I'll continue on with the next step. I'll meet you back here in just a minute. In step 5, we're going to take 2 of our triangles, 2 of our fabric A rectangles, and draw lines from the upper left to the lower right. Once we've got those lines drawn, we're going to take those fabric A rectangles and line them up on fabric D rectangles. So we're going to have 2 pairs that look like this, where we've got the line going across our fabric A like this, and I've made sure I've got the marks on the back of both of those. Now I'm going to go sew 1/4 inch seam on both sides, cut them apart, press the seams open, and then I'll come back here to demonstrate again how we trim those to the size that we want. Okay, so now I'm going to trim this to 2.5 by 4.5 like we did before, putting the 2.5 and the 4.5 on the seam, and I should have just a little bit to trim off the 4 sides to get my perfect little component. Now this is step 5, and all my pieces should end up looking like this. Okay, so again, lining up my 2.5 and 4.5 on the seam, 2.5 and 4.5. Identical components. So I'm going to go ahead and trim up my other two, and I'll meet you back here for step 6. Alright, step 6 is identical to step 5 with 2 major changes. One, I'm drawing the diagonal line in the opposite direction. This was from upper left to lower right. This is going to be from lower left to upper right. And then we're going to pair them with rectangles of fabric E rather than fabric D. So I'm going to go sew, press open, and meet you back here. I'll demonstrate the trim one more time, and then we can move on to step 7. Okay, here's my step 6 units ready to be trimmed up. Again, I'm doing the 2.5, 4.5, so it's 2.5, 4.5 there, the corner up there, and so on until I have them all trimmed up. So your step 5 fabric A and D units will look like this. Your step 6 fabric A and E units will look like this. So let me finish trimming them up and I'll meet you back here. So here's our step 5 fabric AD units and my step 6 fabrics AE units. We're going to pair these together like this. So we're going to make a nice big triangle that's half A and half D and half E, in my case red and blue. We're just going to pair these together and we're going to stitch a 1/4 inch seam along this side. So I'm going to do that with all 4 pairs, and then guess what? I'm going to press those seams open. I'll meet you back here when I have those units done. They should measure 4.5 by 4.5, just like everything else we've made. Here's my step 7 units, and now we have enough pieces we can arrange our block. The center's got our pinwheel. There's our step 7 units. I'm just going to layer this up a little bit so everything fits. There we go. These are step 7 units. And then in our corners are our 1/4 square triangles, and each one is turned a 1/4. So as we go around, white is on the left, the top, the right, and then the bottom. And we can put our step 7 units in on the side, and that's our block. That's going to be our optical illusion. And you'll notice the red and blue are fabric D and E are opposite each other on all around the pinwheel. So we're going to sew it together the way we've done every other block. We're going to sew them together in rows. We're going to, and you have your choice. The instructions say press the rows to the right in the top and the bottom, and to the left on the middle row. I think I'm going to press all of my seams open, both when I make the rows and then when I put the rows together. So let's make the rows, and unlike last month, I'll try to remember to come back here and show you what our rows look like before I put the 3 rows together. Meet you back here in just a minute. Okay, I've got my rows with the seams pressed open, and I want you to notice something. Here's my top and bottom rows. They're identical. One's just rotated relative to the other one. Okay, so now I can put these together, and I hope as you're putting these together, you're using the trick I showed you of putting a seam, a pin straight through, and then pinning the leading edge that's going to lead into the under the needle on your sewing machine in order to get your points to match up. So I'll meet you back here when I got my seams sewn and pressed open. Okay, there you have it. Block 4 of Cheshire Quilters Guild 2019 Block of the Month, Cat Den Mountain BOM, Cat Den Mountain Quilts BOM, is Block 4, Optical Illusion. I hope you enjoyed piecing this block, and I'll see you here next month when we piece the block intertwined.